and welcome to the housing session, the session that's after the last session and before the reception. So hopefully we will have a lovely chat, come up with some interesting questions, and then talk about this project that we've been working on here at Bari, that Tom has been incredibly supportive of and a co-sponsor of. Around housing. So unlike maybe some of the other sessions that you've been to today, and as mentioned, if you were here way back this morning, when Dan started talking and introduced the conference, we're flipping a lot of these sessions, right? From our traditional academic sessions with panels to something a little more community focused. For this is actually a follow-on conversation. So you may have been here for the first conversation, you may not. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna catch you up. We're gonna move the conversation forward a little bit, and then I wanna see what you all think about these things. But everything here will be focused on housing. Know that you are part of a little bit an experiment that's happening as we talk about formal civic research agendas. So this is like a thing that we're doing. And again, I'll walk you through these things, but wanted to introduce Tom.
Hi, everyone. Tom Hopper. I'm the Director of Research and Analytics for the Center for Housing Data at an organization called the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. It's a quasi-public affordable housing agency here in Massachusetts. We do all kinds of things. We finance affordable housing. We help communities plan for more housing. And my team conducts research and analysis to inform better housing conversations across the continent. So very excited to be here with you all.
Cool. Can you give a little bit about why doing this pilot project is interesting to you and OHP?
Sure. Yeah. Let me just jump in and provide a little bit of intention and some thoughts about how we might engage in this process. So some of you in the room, I know, are housing researchers, housing professionals, many of you. This is a great opportunity to kind of bring your expertise there, start to think about research questions you wish you could pursue, some of the really thorny issues. We're going to talk about some 3 priority areas on housing research, and there's a lot of room to play within those areas. And so you're going to have a lot of chances to think about how your own work intersects with the topics we're talking about today. I also think it's important for the housing professionals in the room to stretch yourselves a little bit. Some of these issues are really intractable. So what new methods can we deploy? How can we be creative about solving these problems or asking new questions we haven't had? So I think that's going to be really important to stretch ourselves. For those of you who may not think of yourselves as housing experts, we all have housing knowledge, right? Because housing is very, very personal. We've all lived in multiple places. We've all had housing struggles, housing search struggles. We've all got our own ideas about what housing we'd love to see in the greater Boston region. And so definitely bring your thoughts and opinions. But housing is also a topic that's deeply intersectional, right? So whatever your policy focus is, whatever your studies are, start to think about connections between the research questions we'll explore today and your own field of research. Because housing researchers sometimes have blinders on, right? And building those connections, bringing them to the table and voicing them is going to be really important today. I'd also just like to say, not all research questions we can answer right away. We might not have the data. We may not have developed the methods yet. And so hopefully our conversation today will start to tease out some of those needs. So that's it. I'd just say think creative, think big, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jay.
Thanks, Tom. It's been fun working with Tom. I'm not a housing person. I'm an early childhood person. And so I've been learning a lot about housing actually through this project. It's been really fun and interesting to really dig deep. And this stuff I know some of my colleagues have been really working on. And obviously something personal to me, like Tom said, but it's just not my area, not my jam. So just as a FYI, I'm coming into this from that perspective, from like a really novice perspective of what I know about housing as I live it. Right, what I know about like housing in community is that it's important to me and my community, right? And so like that's my expertise in this area. I'm an expert in other things in other areas, but not in this one. One of the areas I am an expert in, well, hopefully, fingers crossed, right, is thinking about a process through which we might identify our priorities and then come up with questions and then maybe invite partners to help us answer these questions. And that's a big chunk of the work that I actually do. In 2018, I used to work for the city of Boston. I used to work with an organization within the city called the New Urban Mechanics. And together as a team, internal to the city, we were approached by our academic partners. And our partners said, look, you all work for the city. We get it. You guys have a lot of stuff on your plate. Can you just tell us what's important to you? If you could just identify 1, 2, 3 areas that you really want to work on right now. And if that's something I'm interested in as an academic, that's great. If not, yeah, I have a lot of other stuff. Like, right, like I'm happy to work with you. I'm happy to partner with you, but I need to know where I fit. And so because of that, we came up with, when I was at the city, something called the Civic Research Agenda. It was a list of 258 questions that acted as an invitation to any person with an expertise to come and help us, help us. These are the things we work on. And if you have any kind of expertise, lived, research, data, generational, any of those experiences that you think could help us answer these questions, please. And one of my favorite stories, just small sidebar, was our resident from Roslindale sent us a whole thing. She said, I see you have a question on how do we make Boston winters more fun? Because Bostonians seem to not know how to have fun in the winter. And she goes, I'm from Finland. We have tons of fun in the winter. Let me tell you about Finnish saunas. And she came in and did a 40-deck slideshow on Finnish saunas and how enjoyable those things are in the winter and how much nicer people are when they're having a warm time in the winter with their friends outside. This is pre-pandemic. And we were like, yeah, there's no way the city is going to do this, but if anybody wants to, we actually a year later had a private company say, can we put our Finnish sauna, our mobile Finnish sauna in the city? Will you help us find the permits for that? And we were like, yes, because we know from this resident that that is something that helps us bring joy to people in the city. So it existed in the city for a couple of years after that. This is what inviting people to help you solve your problems can do. So this is a process, right, through which we might learn how to do that. It's a process, it's not the process. And so we developed this process to figure out what are our priorities and what are our questions. It's also the product, right? Like the idea of like articulating these things and putting them down, but knowing that they are not necessarily set in stone, knowing that our priorities will change, and therefore our questions will change. So knowing that right now in this moment, this is what we think for this group of people, but that tomorrow, next week, next month, these things might change because that's how the world is, right? But if anybody wants to raise their hand and volunteer right now, I will happily have you. Yes, please, right? So just to orient folks to where we are in this process, at BARI, we are seeing this as a 4-step process. This is a little experimental, we're piloting this. And so part 1, what are our priorities? Well, like technology negative here. We did that. So I'm gonna walk you through what we've already done and with whom, so that you understand that and have the context. Currently, we're in this part 2 section where we'd like to know from you, given what other folks have done previously, how do we push this project forward? So today we're going to do a few things. This is the roadmap to today. This is a small enough group that I think we can go around the room and introduce ourselves. I'm going to do that review. We're going to get to questions, then we'll do some next steps, and then hopefully you'll join us at the reception. Given that, we're curious who is in there. You know who I am, you know who Tom is. But I'm curious, who are you? What's your name? What organization, if any, you're representing? If you want to share your pronouns, that's great. And what brings you to this session? Why? Why spend your time on this Friday afternoon? We are so lucky, right? Like to have you all here. So curious, what brings you here? And whoever wants to start with this one, feel free.
I think I'm sitting in the middle, so. I'm Liz Allen. I work here at Northeastern in the Central Office for Research Development. One of the other hats that I wear is as a board member of a research organization called the Sustainable Consumption Research and Action Initiative. It's an international collective that's kind of interested in these questions about what does sustainable livelihood look like. And I'm just very interested in how we might sort of think about jointly addressing issues of climate change vulnerability and social inequality through really thinking about our housing infrastructure. And so it's something I'm just like passionate about and interested in from both kind of the aesthetic, design, quality of life things, and also as something that makes communities more equitable and just. And yeah, so.
I'm Alana Fusco. I use she, her pronouns. I also work at Northeastern University and in the City and Community Engagement office. And what brings me here today, I guess I would say I'm also not a affordable housing person, but I've always done community relations in all the roles I've had. And so just kind of hoping to gain some more insight into this world and really because I'm aware that as an academic institution and a big one, we take up a lot of space, and so I just want to gain a little more insight into our place in that and what we can do to take that step.
I guess I'll go. My name is Anu. I am from the Attorney General's office. I oversee the Commonwealth's anti-trafficking task force for the state. What brings me here is I actually used to work in homeless services in Boston, so sort of see how the housing infrastructure in Boston fails people, sort of seeing the vulnerabilities of our system that's in place right now, and also there's a lot of intersection between housing and trafficking victims, so lack their access to housing and trafficking victims. So that is what I think.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Wilkerson. I work for an organization called Little Brothers Friends of the Elderly, and we do a lot of work in affordable housing, in senior housing, and also in a previous role, I worked for an organization that had a centralized housing list for Massachusetts, and we did also do a lot of housing search and apply. So I'm just interested in how to make affordable housing, particularly for older adults, more service enriched, and also how to improve the systems that allow people to access the inventory and to work on issues around open units and insufficient applicants.
Hi, I'm Dane Gambrell. I'm a research fellow at the Governance Lab and at the Burn Center for Social Change at Northeastern, which is a new research center where we focus on how to use data and community engagement to address social problems. I'm in this room because I think that the lack of affordable housing in the United States is a very important social problem that I don't know a lot about. So I'm interested to learn more.
Hello everyone, my name is Yvonne. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a data analyst in Revere City Hall. And I'm here today because, as you all know, the housing crisis in America, in our state, in the greater Boston area is just getting worse and worse. And so I want to really learn more about how I can use data to perhaps present it to the council or to really have people be informed of ways that we can improve our community and address the most vulnerable communities, because Revere has a lot of immigrant families and people of color, And so I want to find a way to implement data into the city hall, into the city, so that they can make informed decisions.
I'm Lance Laird, a medical anthropologist at Boston University School of Medicine, not a housing expert at all. But I've been working with an immigrant coalition on health equity. And one of the concerns is obviously housing affordability, crowding, and quality for low immigrants that come to Boston. And really, I am part of the First Baptist Church in Jamaica Plain, and I've been volunteering to deliver lots and lots of food over the pandemic to a lot of people who have housing, but not free.
I'm Rudy Mitchell, senior researcher at the Neighbor Gospel Center. And so we work with churches a lot. I've worked with some mentor ministry students about what churches might do to address affordable housing. But I'm particularly interested because I think that all the polls that I've seen, affordable housing has come up as one of the key issues in Boston, and it certainly affects greater Boston. In fact, so I'm interested in that. Also, what data and metrics could measure gentrification and displacement, and because I think when you have displacement, it kind of breaks up communities and the sense of community.
My name is Sharon Cornelson. I'm a postdoc at the Jordan Center for Housing Studies. So I consider myself a housing scholar. I'm an ethnographer, and as a postdoc, I'm studying the changing city of Brockton, where a lot of Black immigrant home buyers are actually moving. And this is partly a result of displacement from Boston.
My name is Adam Hagar. I'm senior pronouns. I live in Cambridge. I'm faculty at the Harvard School of Public Health and Environmental Health Department. My research group works on asthma. I'm sure you probably know housing is a strong determinant of asthma, particularly deteriorating housing, which has higher incidence of allergens, things like mold or mice or insects can trigger asthma attacks. Yeah, so I guess that's why I'm in this room.
Cool. This is an interesting crowd. It is incredibly diverse in terms of your strong expertise, your work expertise, but also just like who you are, where you're coming from. This is fascinating. This is great. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the previous work that was done. I think it's helpful to have this context since a lot of you are walking through for the first time. So about a month ago, a group of folks met at Northeastern Crossing for a 90-minute session, just like this one, except our question was, what are our housing priorities? This is meant to be, as mentioned, right, an iterative process. And so asking that question to this group of about 15 people is not meant to say like, oh, this is definitively the housing agenda for all of Greater Boston. No, this is a consensus of these 15 people who are representative of various groups and organizations, all that are named here, right? So we've got some academic organizations, we've got some advocacy organizations, we've got some nonprofit organizations with direct service, we've got other groups that are doing more data-centric things, right? And so like, this is a very strong mix of folks. It's also not everyone, and we didn't intend for it to be. What we do intend for is question mark. If this whole experiment works well, we will go back and do a version of this again and add to the priorities that they have already uplifted. So what they did was they came together and did a process together similar to what we're going to do today, but the idea of figuring out what the priorities are. And they came up with 3. So the first priority issue is that there are insufficient resources. And this group very specifically means financial, social, and programmatic resources to meet the tremendous need for the production and preservation of affordable housing and complementary supports, especially for the most vulnerable populations. Does that resonate with you? Does this make sense? Just from your, wherever you're sitting, whatever makes sense for you. Yeah, I'm seeing head nods. Okay, this is good. I'm glad because that means this is validation here. This is data validation that we're doing. Okay. They also came up with, so I mentioned 3, right? So another issue that this group saw was that local control in zoning and permitting and discriminatory real estate practices create barriers to changing the status quo. They prevent diverse housing types, and they continue segregated communities. So I saw that as like another pretty big bucket priority area, issue area. Lastly, out of the 3 that got raised up, creating sustainable and equitable ownership opportunities for community of color. That's as much as we've got there, but I'm assuming that, and I transcribed this directly, I'm assuming that there is a need for this. So, okay, head nods, good. Okay, you are affirming this group's work. Thank you. Yes, okay, so step 1 done. Okay, we're going to move into the meat of what we're going to ask you to do today, which is starting from where they left off. We're going to ask you all to pick up the mantle and say, can we transform some of these issue areas, right, into actionable questions? And so what I'd like you to do is I'm going to walk you through crafting a question. Now, some of you might know this, and some of you, if you are like me, like when in my nerd researcher hat, it took me, I'm not even joking, it took me 3 years to figure out what my research question was, really. Like, really. No, but really, right? Like, that's how long it took me to figure out my dissertation. Like, what was I really asking, right? We can struggle with this for a long time. I'm hoping we don't take 3 years here. There is a reception to go to. But what I'm looking for, right, is what's interesting is you see that the first 2 things when you're crafting a research question, stop me if you know this, but just in case you don't, right, is that it is relevant and that it is focused. And the fun thing that the folks who have done this work, like started this work, have already done is made our priority areas. Now we know that any question that stems from these priority areas will be both relevant and focused. So we don't even have to worry about making sure our questions are that, because they come from this group, like these priority areas, right? They will be relevant and they will be focused. Now, what we want to do is make sure that we craft questions that are specific, that are researchable, and that are feasible, right? All 3 of these things are going to make an actionable question that presumably someone with some time or capacity or resources or an expertise, let's say, or some team of that might pick up the mantle and say, I'm running with this question, let's go. And that's how we're going to craft a civic research agenda. Boom, done. But it's not easy. So here, I would like to ask you, each of you should have a note card. I like to tell folks that I have many, many more, which now I do, thank goodness. I'm kind of glad the public safety folks cleared out because I was really worried about how many note cards I would have, and especially like backup ones. We go through a lot of backup note cards. On your note card, I'd love for you to pick one of these 3 priority areas and just craft one research question that from your lens, you think is specific, researchable, and feasible based on what you know. Yeah? Do you want me to go back and highlight them? Yeah, I figured. Okay, so I'll cycle through them. I'm sad that I didn't put them on this. Some of them are long, so I couldn't put them on the same slide. But this is the first one. So you only need to pick one. If you want to go more than one and be superhuman, that's cool. but you only need to pick one, and then just craft a research question based off of the one. So this is the first one. I'll let it linger for a little bit. Okay, this is the second one. And then the last one. And once again, I'm assuming there's a need for this. Good. You want me to cycle through them again? Anybody?
So our assignment is to craft like, as an individual, like the research question that we would want to ask.
Based on one of these, right?
Address these.
Yeah. And in case it's helpful, here are the elements. These yellow elements are the ones you're really aiming to include. And then when everybody has done faces or postures, we'll move on to the next piece. Okay, as folks finish up their questions, I'm going to ask you to help one another craft, because as mentioned, it took me 3 years to hone in on my own research questions. So if I wasn't doing it by myself, it probably would have gone faster. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get into groups of 2 or 3. And I'm going to ask you to share your research questions with one another and just make sure that they're research questions. So do they fit these yellow criteria? And just in case it's a little more of a help, here are some questions to ask about your neighbor's research questions, right? Can we tell what we need to look at or figure out? Is it a yes/no question, or is it more complicated? Can you imagine collecting data of some kind to answer that question? What's one example of data that could be used to figure out an answer? Can this question be answered in the time frame needed? What kinds of resources would one need to answer this question? So like just thinking about not necessarily answering fully those questions, but being like, do we have an answer to these questions, right? So if you all could get into groups of 2 or 3 and share your questions and just make sure that one another has crafted a solid research question. Let's do it.
All right.
I don't know.
That might feel, like I really don't feel like I need how to address these priority issues. I was gonna pitch myself the issue of discriminatory zoning.
Okay, so does anybody need more time to refine questions? We feel good about your questions? Okay. The next thing I'd like you to do is bring your questions that you've written down, refined. Everybody else has checked your work. Bring them to this table.
Oh, mine's not, I would actually
Rewrite
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry?
Is it okay to write on the back?
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna have to rewrite this.
Okay, don't stray too far. Don't stray too far. Because what I'm gonna ask you to do once all these questions are here is to order them in an order of priority. Which questions should we start with? But not until we get all the questions on this table. And I'll note this is a consensus process, so everyone in the room has to be like, oh yeah, that priority order totally makes sense to me. Cool, thank you. All right, all questions up here? Are we good? Okay. I'm gonna invite everyone to come up here if you're comfortable to read questions and then decide what order they should be prioritized in. Which one is the most pressing question? Or however you want to prioritize it, doesn't have to be pressing. It could just be order of operations. It could just be, right? You can tell me that some questions are tied and they have to go simultaneously. But I want to know some version of priority. We can't do all of these questions at once. Oh yeah, sometimes questions can be similar. So you also might want to combine questions if it makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's fewer cars than there are people in there, right? On the table.
This is about existing assets, so maybe that's like a pretty high priority.
Yeah.
It's something that's like, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that there's a few that are sort of just like questions about like what is the current state of the situation, and some that are like some testing a policy intervention or change.
Yeah, like ones that are speaking directly to a policy that they recommend to, you know, the new administration. I feel that should be high. I was just wondering if someone else.
Well, no, it's a launch that is part of this plan.
Okay. I feel these are already getting, there's already a new state law around zoning regulation.
What's the individual experience of housing instability believe will be the most impactful program or tool or resource in addressing the housing instability of homes?
Pretty good.
I feel like this.
Yeah, no, it's a good like central question. Like, yeah.
And so it's like this is like, and then it's like this one, you can try to answer this question.
This may also be a pretty cheap resource. This is like the graphic as a pretty
This is also.
Oh yeah, how much would it cost if we were to charge people only return oh, 25.
There's like blocks for them.
That's also a relevant cost. It's a big philosophical one.
Yeah.
So you use
How can we
communities.
pursue
What's that?
economic justice and equity while
Promoting racial equity in the homeownership market. We were discussing this like, if you lift some people up, like if you lift some people up to the homeownership class, you still have this really big divide between the renter class and the homeownership class. So you're not solving that bigger class inequality. So like this sort of tension between, oh, we want to promote homeownership among, you know, lower income and middle color groups. But then, like, how you're solving it broader, because not everyone will be like able to become homeowners, right? So like, how can we solve both issues within that situation? So it's more like academic, philosophical question.
Yeah.
I think this is-
But it does, I think, have like some very practical zoning implications, like does a certain amount of the housing stock remain designated rental only, so that it's, you have
Yeah, and like programs that are
mixed
programmed
use, you know, yeah.
But plus a very high percentage of. These two have to do with this sort of current zoning.
Correct.
And those have to do with current real estate practices.
Discrimination.
Yeah.
So, and then the universities, I think that, is that considered like a community asset? Maybe this can be like a branch. Maybe this could be like a branch of the center question. I don't know, maybe, you guys can tell me if I'm
I
wrong.
just feel it's like, it's not really a city issue, you know what I'm saying, because like, if we're addressing public policy, I don't know, who are we talking for, you know what I'm saying? Are we the city, are we universities?
It kind of
Are we both?
they kind of intersect because the students are in the city. There's-
Absorbing housing.
And it's on one hand, it's like they are part of the community. And so, but it's a little bit difficult.
Yeah, but they change.
Gentrifiers and displacers.
So that's
But yeah, I agree that these are like.
We made a network of questions.
Hey, so to walk me through this. What did you make? Is this the top? If we had to ask the first, which is the first
This is
question?
this is the first question.
Yeah, I sort of see like the center column there as being the fundamental, like what is the state of, you know, housing issues in the Boston area. It's like have some questions that address like what are the perceived and known gaps, what is the kind of existing patterns, I guess, and then we have some questions.
With policy implications, but these are the most direct policy implications too, I guess. These are-
Also, Also, they also help define the problem.
Yeah, and so that's looking at problem definition, and these are sort of existing
Yeah, like I guess
regulations and laws, and then existing practices.
Okay. Wait. Does everybody here agree that this is the way they should all fit together? If we were gonna address the first set of questions, we should all start with these. Do we feel good about this?
Yeah,
Yeah?
I feel like confident.
Aha, consensus. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. This is what we want. This is the next step. Step complete. Thank you. Yeah, you done it. I'm gonna take a picture of this just so I know what the order is. Oh. That one seems questionable now. Just can someone read these top ones that should get addressed first? I'm curious where you all landed. Or maybe not one person, but a couple people.
I can read the first one. Why do individuals experiencing housing instability believe would be the most impactful programs, tools, or resources to address housing instability in Boston?
How do we use existing community assets to increase social program supports in affordable housing?
Next one is if urban communities had a trust fund to assist everyone in need of housing help so that they pay 25% of their income or less on rent or mortgage, how much would be? Interesting.
I can see so many expertise, discipline, like, right, like attacking each of these questions from like different angles. Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be a cool set of projects? Okay, here's my question to all of you as we wrap up the day. And as I hear the reception start to come together, I can't, I was just kidding. But, what now? Okay, so we have a set of priorities that I've shared with you all. We have an ordering of a set of questions, and I took a picture about how the configuration looks, right? What should we do next?
Well, for me, this goes to a conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago. Like, I feel like me personally, I need to understand more about just the issues around housing in the Boston area for like, I would be all prepared to like go begin a research project. And I just feel like for me, a next step like here at Northeastern is like, who from the community can come and speak to us about the work that existing community organizations are doing and essentially like the experience of people who are experiencing housing instability. That's my interest in like my next step.
And some of those folks might come from and maybe we can even draw from the previous group in case if you have them, we know who they are. We have email, right? So if you have interest in connecting with those folks too, and maybe even updating, saying, this is your priority question or what your priority area, right? Like let's chat. That's great. Thanks, Liz. Other next steps, other thoughts, either personal or as a group, like what should happen to these questions?
Maybe another session like this with another group, because this is just one moment. It's like one consensus. Like it'd be very interesting to have that with a completely different group and just kind of see. I feel intuitively like, you know, is it do the same priorities come up? Because this is just one moment. That would be, I feel more robust as a research starting. You know,
yeah. Well, as a nerd, I always think that I find that a curiosity. So it's nice to hear that that's echoed at least. Like, if there's a curiosity as to like how other people would approach this. Okay, cool. Yeah.
I would say repeat the same exercise, but online involving hundreds or thousands of people instead of people in this room.
We should talk about how to scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that. Like, look, you all were willing to participate in this little experiment, right? So maybe there are hundreds of people who are willing to participate in the online version.
I mean, it seems like some of the things that we easier to answer in terms of available data, or there's somebody in the room that can answer all those questions. You know, I mean, in terms of existing regulations, existing real estate practices, I mean, I'm sure some of them. I don't, you know, but if I were trying to design something to answer one of the other questions, I would do it. Like, where are we starting from?
Yeah, I think with having the volume of people like doing the same exercise, I think it creates a very large database that we could basically filter out the key items that we can find consensus with. And so I think the more information you have with that.
And part of the vision for this is if it works, right? If we find a means to make it work, to either do it again and again, or do it at scale, or do both. And to the point of like more data points is interesting, right? And you can see a small group can find the similarities in cluster, and then with a giant data set, I'm sure we can do much more, right? In terms of like finding, okay, where are the common threads? What makes sense where? How we order these things. So, yeah, totally. Does anybody here, like, this is the community's product, and by that I mean this room, right? Like this, I do not own it, Northeastern does not own it, like y'all own it. Curious what you would like to do with these questions next, like who should they live with? Would you like to see them go online and like, right, like one of the, I'll just offer that Ari can we have a website, we could do that, but I also don't want to own that, right? So if that's something that someone else here wants to take charge of or hold, that's totally cool too. But curious what you think. We've got something here. It's the start of something. What should we do?
I can take a picture of it, put it on Twitter
Hmm.
and say. Yeah. Public platform. Yeah. I don't know.
I think it would be good to have some space that was hosted, where you have the questions and perhaps people could tag and say, I'm interested in this,
Oh, yeah.
Develop collaborations.
Tag me in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. So you won't hold on to that? I can. If you want. I'm but a public servant.
I was looking through your list of 200 and something questions.
Come
Come
on. Civic Research Agenda, Boston.
Okay.
Will surface the new urban mechanics civic research. And they're still active. They're working on a 2.0, which we'll see how the summer goes, but I think it's slated to come out with a second version of it this summer. I'm not working on that. A different person is. But that was a fun couple year ride until COVID. Everybody had the same research question. How do we help this? But for 2 years, we had a pretty solid, like it was April 2018 to all the way up until COVID, where we were we actually printed a book. We bring the book with us to meetings, and that helped us catalyze projects where there was points of intersection. And the physical book still lives somewhere.
Let's say, I mean, that you were working,
Mhm.
and you had several demonstration projects in the year, like tiny houses. And
Yep.
Creative
You got it.
solutions.
That's it.
Yeah, I saw the website.
So yeah, this is hopefully a catalyst for things. Hopefully, at the very least, if you haven't already, you're walking away with a new connection. That hopefully will. Who knows what will happen? Maybe you'll just go to lunch with me. That would be nice. I've left evals, because what's a data conference without a nice set of data collection at your tables, and would appreciate if you, like, they're anonymous, so like if you could do some circles and maybe some words, that would be awesome. And if not, that's also fine. And maybe what I'll do is hang on to these if that's okay, and we can figure out how to move forward from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks, thanks, Mom. Thanks. Yeah, and thanks, KJ. Thanks, Dave.